Hello, circuit listeners. Welcome to another episode. I am Ben Beharan.
Greetings, Internet. I am Jay Goldberg. I'm coming to you from Paris of the San Joaquin Valley, Merced, California. So apologies ahead of time if the Wi-Fi on my end is a little buggy.
Good old Merced, the the country Middle Valley, Central Valley, California.
That's right.
All right, so we're doing a follow-up on Nvidia, taking a much sort of deeper look holistically at what are we calling them? The darling of the semiconductor industry, the darling, the king of AI something. I don't know.
Savior
They
of the
need a name.
universe.
Savior of the stock market. Wild times though, because obviously there is a tremendous amount of bullishness on Nvidia from pretty much everybody on the investment side that we talk to. Very, very bullish on their position, their hold in the market. So we thought we'd take a deep dive and go through a couple different pillars of of a view of the company, and we'll start with kind of how competition is shaking up because obviously,
So before we jump in, I just want to preface this by saying, like, this is something I've been working on for a while, and the idea is that, like, I'm increasingly higher conviction that NVIDIA is in really good shape, and I felt that it would be the intellectually honest approach to thinking about that is to test out my thesis, right? And so just I wanted to walk through all the ways in which we could be wrong about NVIDIA and look at some of the vulnerabilities that they might have. Right? I don't hate NVIDIA. It's quite the opposite. I'm pretty bullish on them, but I did want to just sort of think through the mental exercise of what could go wrong. And just to be clear, we're going to talk about NVIDIA the company. NVIDIA the stock is like they're almost not related at this point. Like, let's just talk about NVIDIA the company. The stock is too weird to track at this point. So anyway,
well, I mean, yes, but I also think any good analysis should include not just thesis testing, but we need to be able to we need to be able to argue the bull case too, right? Where are they weak? Where are they vulnerable? What scenarios could play out that that open up a different a different view? So
right.
that's you got to take all sides of the argument to be fully informed. So essentially, we'll do that. I don't think I think you and I might bounce back and forth between a positive and or a negative side, but yeah. All right, let's get to it. So let's start with competition. Right, there's ask a casual person today that follows this industry about Nvidia, and they have no competition. And I think the market and investors have rewarded them with said PE because the view is, well, they don't really have any direct competitors. So, all right, so let's talk through that. Let's talk through some names and then I guess some concepts of competition, if we will. Um, so I think we'll start with AMD. AMD is probably brought up as the second person on competing with NVIDIA, but it's more from an inference side with MI300X and obviously future versions of that. But that appears to be it. Doesn't necessarily be training, but people view inference is going to be a good dollar part of this market. AMD seems to be the second best positioned there, and I believe their sort of valuation is accordingly on the dollar run rate that they can pick up. But as a secondary, so let's roll through AMD. Are you positive? Do you think they have more challenges or more opportunities to compete with Nvidia?
Yeah. So I think AMD. I'm positive on AMD, but I don't think that they're going to make any big crack in NVIDIA's market share. They're going to carve out a nice piece for themselves, but they're not what I would consider a threat to NVIDIA's sort of hegemony in the market right now. They have a good product, but they don't have all the other pieces beyond the silicon, right? And so the amount of customers who can actually use that is fairly narrow, uh, right? So right, they like the big news last quarter was they got firm design win from Microsoft. They're standing up a
Yeah.
big MI300 cluster at Azure. Um, and from what I can tell, performance looks good, but actually it's not fully up and running yet. And networking is an issue. And like, if you just go down the list, there's nothing wrong with the chip itself, but it's all the other pieces around it that are going to be challenging. So that sounds to me like AMD is building something good for themselves, but it's not a threat. They're sort of in different tiers of competition at this point.
Right. Yeah, and we'll get to the software bit, but obviously what you use to write your AIML stack in is a big deal because that's either going to dictate how stuck you are on CUDA, whether or not you can just move PyTorch in what you're doing to another vendor that supports it, in this case AMD for inference. But I think that's kind of my worry with them, which unfortunately will give away my broader view on Nvidia, is AMD's just like one or two pieces of this complete puzzle.
Yes.
And because
Yes.
of that, it's really hard when you're making decisions for
Yes.
I just could buy by one or two components. So that ultimately to me is their biggest challenge, and really where they're behind in just being, a small
Yep.
part of the whole
Yep.
platform.
Yep. Yep.
All right, AMD. What about Intel?
You're going to call me a curmudgeon, but I think Intel. What do they have now? They're trying to compete with Gaudi 3, and
With
I
training,
think
yeah.
with training and their story on inference is a little bit mixed because they talk a lot about CPU for inference, which is a valid point. But in terms of sort of core GPU competitiveness, Gaudi 3 is not there yet, right? It's an okay product, but like if this whole thing is a big puzzle and you need all the pieces, and NVIDIA is the only one who has all the pieces, AMD has three or four of the pieces, Intel I think has one of the pieces, two, and I think Gaudi 4 when it comes out, I think later this year, makes it more interesting. But it's we're very early in their roadmap, and so I think that they maybe somewhere down the road they can catch up, but they're certainly not in Gaudi 3 or Gaudi 4. They're less of a threat to NVIDIA than AMD.
So one thing, and because we're talking about this, one thing we didn't touch on last week, that you and I have peripherally talked about. Jensen has a thesis that that AI factories, or whatever we want to call them, right? That as you shift more of these AI servers to the data center, that the ratio of CPUs to GPU is going to go down. So if it was 3-to-1 CPUs to GPUs, he believes that that's going to normalize, which would indicate less CPU in, as a percentage of that data center spend. So I say that just to say the threat is not just these inference bits or training bits. The threat is also CPU volume, if he's right.
Yeah. Another one of these role reversals. You're more negative on Intel than I am, so I agree. There is, as much as everybody, all the hyperscalers are spending tens, hundreds of billions of dollars to build out AI. They've got a lot of money, but that money has to come from somewhere, and I think some of it is going to come from CPU share of wallet, which is not good for Intel.
Yeah, I think that's the part to me. I don't know. We don't know the answer, but I do think as a part of being looking at both sides of this coin, I think you need to have a point of view on this ratio. Do you even need as many CPUs as you did before in these AI data centers or AI factories, whatever we believe the nomenclature is going to be? Or is it rational that as they rethink these, you don't need as many? And that's, again, I think a more negative case for CPU as general, but that's Jensen's thesis. I think he believes
Right.
the ratio will be much more balanced of CPU to GPU, which is great for NVIDIA. Honestly, probably not so great for others. But to your point, when we look at this in competition, I do believe that the CPU has a role in inference. I believe every bit, AI is not going to run on just one thing. It's going to run on multiple parts of the stack. The CPU is there. So I'm not disassociate. I say that to not disassociate or take AMD's or Intel CPU strategies out of this equation because it's there. But I think you got to balance that with what's your actual viewpoint on the mix of CPUs to GPUs in these data centers of the future, which we don't know, but it's worth having a point of view, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we're on the same frequency here. But I know that we're going to get people coming at us on Twitter and in DM saying it's even worse for Intel,
Well,
right?
but
So
okay, so
I think it's in the middle.
potentially, I'd agree. Do you think, to my first point though, about AMD being, a couple pieces of the puzzle, do you think uh, because Intel has a little bit more of the stack, do you think they have more pieces of the puzzle than AMD, or less pieces of this puzzle than AMD?
I think they have fewer now, fewer than AMD,
Okay,
right? Because I'm thinking of networking,
of course, yeah. AMD has that.
right? I
Intel
think
doesn't have networking.
no,
I
right,
think
and
I
then
think I think Well, I was just gonna say, I think if we weren't talking about AI, God, man, I really hate this name, so we need to come up with something else. AI factories. I think we would agree they're still in a strong position. I think, but because we're changing the dynamic of these workloads, that's the pressure that I think is here for what historically the product offerings have been from Intel and AMD, and because that's changing, that's putting pressure on the competitive dynamic of how many pieces of this puzzle they're bringing to this dedicated AI server market.
yeah. I mean, I think it's broader than just the AI factories. I think it's sort of just heterogeneous compute, which by its name implies more than just CPUs, and then we get into the software side of things where it gets even worse. I think. Well, we'll talk about software in a minute, but I think there's another sort of lurking problem out there for Intel when it comes to software.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So then let's move to a couple. We mentioned these briefly a couple weeks ago when we were chatting with Austin. Obviously, there's some startups trying to come out here and provide, again, to use my analogy, which is going to be Ben's analogy of the day. I think anybody who's listened to me, I may very well pick up on one thread, but we're on this puzzle thread, so here we go. But there's startups that only have one piece of the puzzle, not even two, just one, and they're making a go at these things. So we got Grok. We've covered them before. They've sort of been talked about a lot. They're doing really, really good social media. Obviously, their demo's fantastic. You can go to their website and demo how super fast their inference is. It's on a much smaller billion parameter model than what most people run, but that's despite the point. They are a dedicated inference service. Is that a competitive threat to Nvidia?
So I think the startups are something to watch, right? I think Grok in particular, Etched, maybe possibly, but we don't know much about them. I think Grok is interesting because I think they have more than just one piece of the puzzle. They have a complete stack, right? And that's how they're able to do this, to offer it as a service. I think what's going to happen with Grok is that they're going to be the use cases in which they're going to be competitive is not the whole market. It's going to be some subset of the broader inference market where they can outperform in certain workloads. And I think they are very competitive, but I don't see them as a broad threat the way that AMD theoretically could be. Right. So I think from what we know about Grok so far, they've got their piece of the puzzle, and there are things that they can do, and there are things they can't do. And the things they can do well, arguably better than Nvidia. We just don't know how big, how much of that market will end up going their way. But I do think that I think they have a whole puzzle for their piece of the market.
Okay. I mean, are you how? So the main thing I struggle with, and I do think this is also a philosophical question, is how much you're interested in outsourcing just your inference. Like, because I view this as, if I'm going to run all my workloads, we're a business, we're going to train models, we're going to run those models, we're going to continue to fine tune them, yada yada yada. And I'm already doing all this on, call it an Nvidia stack. What would compel me to outsource just my inference? And that's why I come at this again from this, like, okay, it's one piece of the puzzle. Is it that my costs go down dramatically? Is it that they save me so much in energy? Like that's the angle I think that needs to be teased out, because you're really just outsourcing one part of your workloads instead of keeping them in a whole, platform based approach where you might again, there's a trade off to that. Is my point. I don't understand all the trade offs, but there has to be some trade offs to that.
So I think Grok is. I think it comes down to just economics, right? I think for services for models and queries that work for Grok's capabilities, the economics of using Grok will be superior. And so then, if you're a customer, not the hyperscalers, but if you're a customer of a hyperscaler, a big bank or a big enterprise, where you're just going to go to a hyperscaler anyway to get NVIDIA instances, you're going to find that there are going to be a certain number of tasks that are radically more efficient to be done on Grok. And so you run it on Grok, and you just sort of work that into your DevOps workflow, right? And like I think that's and then the equation just becomes, all right, it's X% cheaper to run on Grok, but it's Y% overhead to sort of move my models from my NVIDIA CUDA training environment into Grok. And for some people, that last piece will be too high, and they'll just stick with NVIDIA. But for other people, they'll say, all right, we're doing so much of this. If Grok works for us, let's do it and save a whole bunch of money. I think that's the equation. It's all just math and economics at some point.
What about okay? We'll return to some of that. I think that's a good point to move there. And is your view the same on Etched?
Maybe we don't know enough about Etched yet. I think they're going to decloak later this year, and they'll hopefully put out some performance numbers. But we just don't know much about them. Except I think it looks likely that they're very, very specialized around transformer-based models, and I think that the risk there is if the world shifts and we move away from transformers, or we get Transformers 2, the sequel, then that puts them at risk. But at this point, we just don't know enough about them to say one way or the other. It's just I put them out there because it sounds like they're onto something, and so it's worth keeping track of. But we don't know enough to say one way or the other yet.
Yeah. The other one out there that I think is interesting is Cerebras. They had an AI day last week on the back of, or 2 weeks ago on the back of GTC. It's really tough to say where this momentum is coming and then where these build outs are coming. They've obviously got a couple design wins. They're really focused on training, which again, I think is useful. It's good to have some training options, but they're taking, again, really that piece of the puzzle relative to just this one workload, trying to do a better job. But again, if you can train it there, you've still got to then take what you've trained and put it somewhere else. So again, I'm just sort of questioning, like, one part of my workflow. It's a lot of management there for a lot of businesses, but any thoughts on Cerebras?
I'll take the under.
The under. Okay. It's a challenge. Look, I get it. I mean, I think we've come out and said, look, training's gone to Nvidia. Good luck to anybody who's trying. I appreciate the efforts. There's going to be a space. I just think Nvidia's soaked up so many training dollars. It's really, really hard. Anytime somebody's like, we're going to do training. Okay. Like, I recognize how hard that is.
Yeah. I think Cerebras is a technical marvel. It's just the commercialization of it, and the business case doesn't jive with me.
Yeah. So I think the competition that we both agree is the most threatening is custom silicon. And to be honest with you, Jensen has passionately addressed this several times, because if he takes this view where he's kind of like, look, and to be honest with you, this is the right approach. It's also the approach to me that's the most interesting if I was arguing that NVIDIA would beat this trend of custom silicon, which is that he's just dead centered that he has to make a better product than they can make to meet their needs. And that's, I think it's a valid strategy and point, because if they're like, well, we can't make one as good, well then why are we spending an insane amount of money, right? Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to do chip tape outs. But I think this, I mean, I don't even know how many episodes we've talked about custom, but the trend because of it is verticalization. People want to control more parts of their stack. That's why they're going to do their own accelerators. So they are, in my opinion, the remaining biggest single threat to Nvidia, but also that is relative to hyperscalers who can do it, not a bunch of the other markets out there that might do on-prem or more of these AI factories that aren't hyperscalers. So still a big market, but obviously Nvidia makes a ton of money from the hyperscalers. So that competition could be significant.
So yeah, I agree with everything you said. The only thing is that when I started compiling this list and I was going through this section, and I started thinking through where each of the hyperscalers stand on their internal silicon, I realized that Jensen's winning this fight, at least at this stage, right? If he's going to go out and say, hey, I'm going to make a better chip, a better product that's going to suit your needs better than whatever you can design internally, he's winning that argument right now, right? I think Google and TPUs are the one exception. I think Google has a really clear understanding of what needs to be done, and I think TPU for their needs way outperforms what they get on NVIDIA. But they're still buying a bunch of NVIDIA to do training, so there's that. And then you look at everyone else; no one else is close, right? Microsoft is on Gen 1 of their accelerator,
right?
And they're talking big numbers now about building out more capabilities. The assumption is they're going to do something with OpenAI and co-design some silicon or something with them. But if you think about it, OpenAI is a big part of Microsoft's AI strategy, obviously, and they've made a big investment in that. But their investment is almost not entirely, but is largely in the form of Azure credits for OpenAI, and all those credits are running on NVIDIA today. So, I think they're going to talk about doing their own accelerator, but they have, like, this current one is very much Gen 1. Like it's going to take a couple cycles. So I don't think they really get serious about having a competitive product until Gen 3, which is past Blackwell, probably R100 timeframe. Right? And that's a long time and a few $100 million of development to get there. Right.
Yeah,
and then beyond
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say
once you get beyond
the part that I think is interesting within that is A, the time point you said, and B, what we don't know is a lot of these things have been in the works with architectures that are being updated that aren't really AI specific architectures yet. So right. Even the way that Amazon's put this, like they came at it from an approach that was already a vested approach prior to ChatGPT. So we're not sure how they'll make those evolutions, but it's still, it feels still uncompetitive, which we just acknowledge.
That's right. And then you get beyond Microsoft, and there's nobody else out there is too serious. I mean, I can't figure out Facebook or Meta. Like they have been dabbling in this market. They have tested out everybody's silicon. They've kicked the tires on everybody's design teams, doing their own stuff. And they're still buying a ton of NVIDIA, and I think they're making a lot of money on that, and they're pretty happy with it. So I think that maybe down the road they do their own thing, and they're the best position to do it because they control their whole software stack, and they just don't seem in a big hurry to get their accelerator game together.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, I think
so that.
Same with Amazon though, right? I mean, I feel like they come at this angle and they just say, well, if you want to save money and it's sustainable, and that's fine, but is it better? Like, can I do the same workload for less money or less time? Like, what are those customer benefits? And that's the thing I think they'll have to continue. And then again, to your point, everybody keeps buying, there's a line out the door for Blackwell because they know their customers are going to want Blackwell, not these other parts.
Yep. And I don't think Trainium and Inferentia at Amazon are doing particularly well. And Amazon has this big problem where they may have this big grand AI accelerator strategy, but their customers don't want it. Their customers want NVIDIA. So
Yeah.
NVIDIA's, AWS is going to keep buying NVIDIA.
Yeah. So on that point though, I thought it was super interesting because every time I drive, your way, I keep watching on 101 how many billboards have AI in it or about AI.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not even joking. Like every week this changes. It's probably like 70% of 101 North billboards have AI in it. However, what I noticed has changed in the past few weeks is now a lot of those companies that are saying like we do this on AI have an Nvidia logo on it. And so it's like, because back to your point, right? Nobody ever got fired now for buying Nvidia, running Nvidia.
Right.
It's like it like how do you want to say it? It's like the moat feels like it keeps getting wider. It's
Yes.
I guess how I'm saying
Yes.
it. Despite we're talking about competition,
Yes.
every bit of evidence I see is just like
Yeah. Yes.
more for Nvidia. The moat keeps growing.
Yep. Yep. There's a giant billboard right at my exit that just says need GPUs. Giant pink billboard. Need GPUs. And it's from one of these AI factories that is 100% NVIDIA. So yeah, but I
All
mean that's
right,
why we're doing the
all
show.
right.
It's that, like we have all this momentum in NVIDIA's favor. Let's talk through how we could be wrong. That's why we're doing this.
Yeah. So all right. So the software side, this constantly comes up. To be honest with you, and it's again something that Jensen keeps saying. He talks about how entrenched CUDA is, and again, I see the bunch of debates in these from folks that I talk to in the AI world about how entrenched CUDA is, or more importantly, how alternate programming languages are really their predominant areas, so they feel like there's more portable. Fine, that's all fine. The software question, though, I still think really needs to be more addressed in a real world market application, because I guess some of the things I've heard are a lot of these companies who may have more data scientists, specific AI programmers. Yes, they can do a lot of this in PyTorch. They're comfortable, but then there's a lot of people who, again, may or may not be the top 20% in programming for AI, and for them, CUDA is still a viable mechanism because it is just so easy and portable. So part of me feels like I recognize it's not all CUDA, but I also recognize that for a lot of people, CUDA is what they use, and CUDA is still a lot of that stickiness that keeps the NVIDIA ecosystem going.
Yeah, and I think one of the clear themes of GTC the last 2 years has been that CUDA is just kind of shorthand for it's not just CUDA anymore. It's all these libraries
Yeah,
and pre-built models and services like NIMs that are coming on top of it, where everybody's used to using NVIDIA, and NVIDIA just keeps giving them more and more things to be used to. And they're going to hate this word, but it's locking people in. Like that's the goal. It's like, oh, you use NVIDIA GPUs, you use CUDA. Why don't you use my library and my NIM? And right, it just keeps. And then it's your customer has no incentive to leave. It just becomes that burden of switching to something else becomes too high. But I will say the what's not clear is the extent to which anyone is adopting those things.
hmm.
Right? It's very early. Like NIMS just got announced last week. We'll see in a year if NVIDIA's still talking about NIMS and people are still using NIMS. Because
Right.
they do have this track record of talking big about things that's kind of fade away after time. And it's not clear yet how many people really want all these things. How many is the market ready for it? Are the customers out there really going to use it? Um, because because still like people can still build their models in PyTorch, right? And that will run on CUDA just as well as anything else. Like PyTorch itself is not a threat to CUDA. And so but once you get to the PyTorch level, customers are maybe less interested in getting all these NVIDIA add-ons. So like, I can do it better myself.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer here. I don't know what the answer is. I think it's still too soon to tell. But that's something that I'm keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, I think so what I come back to is I think your point about cost of switching is a big one, but I also come back to like ease of use. There's a lot of organizations out there that just need an easy toolkit, an easy path
Hmm.
to train and optimize their models. Again, they're not going to employ loads of data scientists to do all this work. And so I feel like, again, I kind of look at it this way. If you just look at the diffusion of innovations in the consumer market, right, where you say your top 15 to 18% of early adopters are the heavy lifters, they go through the pain, they like the pain. Then you got the middle majority, which is the vast majority of the market, right, 60% and plus. And then and they just want ease of use. They just want stuff that works. They don't want to fumble with stuff. And then you got the laggards where it's even more entrenched to like, nah, it's got to get done for me and I'm slow. I feel like that middle majority of enterprises, of companies who need to adopt AI, they just want it to work. They don't want to fuss with it.
Yeah.
They want it to be simple. And that's going to continue to be a strong story for Nvidia and their ecosystem.
Yep. I agree.
Are there
I
any
agree.
other software workloads that pose any kind
Well,
of threat?
the other two, like in some senses, it seems like Nvidia, the biggest threat to Nvidia software is Nvidia itself. Its ability to keep coming out with software that people actually want to use. I think that's a much bigger concern to me than alternatives coming like ROCm from AMD,
Right.
or what's this new one, UXL that's coming from Intel and a bunch of others. Like this whole consortium that's out there building this alternative to CUDA, and like those things don't work because you have 15 companies in the consortium. They're all going to pull it in different directions, right? And ROCm, for both of them, the question is always going to be like what percentage of the CPUs that are covered by, or GPUs that are covered by this software layer you're promoting, what percentage of them actually run the software, right? Because in NVIDIA, it's 100%. CUDA runs on every NVIDIA GPU.
Right.
Even at AMD, like ROCm runs on a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of AMD's GPUs. And how do you get everyone else on board? And it's like I don't think those are a serious threat at this stage.
Yeah. Well, and I think we've talked about this before where, we're like, people tell us, wow, I don't want to just be locked in NVIDIA's walled garden. And then everybody just continues to be happily
That's right.
locked into NVIDIA's
That's not
walled
true.
garden. So it's kind of like,
That's right.
you could argue that the threat is we don't want to adopt more, right? Because then they got us by the throat, and you're like, well, they make it really easy.
That's right.
So
That's
what?
right.
They got you by
That's
the
right.
throat. Keep making money.
Yeah. Yeah. It's everybody's like, oh, I don't want any more NVIDIA. I'm going to do something about it. But first, let me write this $1 billion check to NVIDIA.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe in 2 years, then you're just all right. So the market. Let's talk sort of broadly about the market. We've addressed sort of stuff around bubbles. Is it a bubble? How long it can grow? I mean, I think everybody agrees it's very very early. Most businesses are still in the early stages of piloting projects, not even deploying. How long those projects are going to deploy, who knows? Um, market thoughts in terms of where we're now. We're now April 2024, and I don't know if we know any more than we did 6 months ago about use cases, business models, and really where
Hmm.
enterprises are going to double down, right?
Hmm. So first of all, let me just say the fact that 80% of the billboards on 101 are AI focused tells us very clearly that we are in a bubble. But but I think there are people I know on the street who argue that AI is a bubble, capital B,
Okay.
and it's all going to
Okay.
collapse, and then I guess we're gonna go back to normal or whatever. I think that's wrong. Like AI in some form is here to stay, and I think the more nuanced way of making that argument is to say to what degree does future compute rely on AI, specifically neural network based machine learning, right? And we just don't know. I think the one thing we've learned over the last 6 months is that there are like I always talk about this, is like under the hood gains, small gains, 15% here, 10% there. Those are here to stay. They're important. We'll see more of those, right? For me, the question is more around like, how much more can we do, right? Do we start to have emergent capabilities or, exciting advances, right? Whenever GPT-5 comes out, is it going to be just wow us? That's possible, maybe, right? And the other question is, what consumer applications are we going to find for AI? And I think that
Yeah.
part is still a really big open question.
Yeah, and I think the challenge also being, right, what does this look like in terms of economics from, business is going to pay money to train, optimize,
Right.
fine tune, and deploy these models, right? And so they need to know their ROI is going to be significant. If they're funding the cost for their employees in business optimization, it's not coming free to anybody. And then what will consumers actually pay for? Like, we don't think we have any of those answers about the business model, and the underlying tension with that is we don't know what the full value proposition is going to be that causes any kind of premium to these business models, right? In terms of, because I've seen software numbers like in the trillions. People have been like, this is going to be a trillions-dollar software market where people are just going to be spending money on services and subscriptions, and they're going to pay more to SAP and Salesforce and Adobe for these things. And like, maybe,
Yeah. Right. Maybe.
I don't know, So that, I think that's the challenge. But I think that's an interesting point though, like we were saying, is that it's moving really slow, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Like, it feels like it's moving
Yeah.
fast, but it's also moving slow because, like I said, we still don't know any more than we did 6 months ago about how this is going to be deployed in the real world so that every day people use these things and find value.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It's happening there in lots of ways we don't notice, but it's not happening in big ways, which we kind of need to really drive the market forward in a big way. And I mean, if I were to construct a bear case, if I wanted to short Nvidia, it would be around this question, right? And it would just be like, oh, we never get there, and we just stall out. And now, personally, I don't think that's going to happen. But I'm also not, I'm not sitting here thinking we're going to get AGI next year.
Yeah. No, not even close. Not even close. Okay, so we agree the market feels like it's moving fast, but it's also in real world deployment. Why isn't anybody care about these things, and who's going to make extra money? We don't know anything more than we did 6 months ago, and we probably won't know. I don't know if we'll know any more in December than we know now about where we're going. Ecosystems, AI. I mean, AI factories. I hate this word again. But there
I
is
am
a infrastructure ecosystem that's happening. That's the stage we're in, the build out stage, infrastructure.
I am super fascinated. I'm fully deep into the rabbit hole about AI factors, and I think Jensen uses the term very specifically. What he's talking about are data centers that are independent of the hyperscalers
Yes.
that are GPU focused. Right?
Yeah.
They'll have some CPUs, but it's really GPU focused and really NVIDIA focused.
Yeah.
And at GTC, I walked around the floor. I talked to there are about a half dozen at the show. There's another half dozen out there in the world. Um, and I asked every single one. I'm like, well, I played dumb. I'm like, I'm just a dumb finance guy. Why should I use you and not just AWS? And with one exception, the answer always came down to, oh, we have GPUs. Come work with us, not AWS, because we have GPU availability. At Amazon, you're going to wait 6 months to get instances. Right? And the one exception was CoreWeave, which is probably the biggest and best known of them, who legitimately have some networking expertise. There's some performance gains available on CoreWeave's GPU systems that aren't available elsewhere. But still, the root of the value they're offering is we have GPUs today. And to me, that's not sustainable,
Not
right?
sustainable at all.
Right? Because, unless semiconductors stop being cyclical, it's right at some point having GPUs is not going to be a competitive differentiation.
Right.
And so, and part of the reason I'm really focused on this is because when Nvidia stock comes down to earth, this will be the warning sign that this will be the red flag. This will be the canary in the coal mine, whatever metaphor, right? Because these guys are all operating at the edge of supply demand equilibrium, and as soon as that tapers off in favor of supply, you're going to start to see problems that these companies emerge. I think
Yeah.
to me, that's like, and like, if you really want to get conspiracy theories, there's like all these conspiracy theories online about Nvidia doing funny things with accounting and shenanigans with these companies. That's all nonsense. But there is a very real risk where this is a channel that is now stuffed full of Nvidia product. And when inventory cycles turn, the channel is where the problems emerge.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. I mean, I think that goes back to something we talked about, last week, where I said, the question I'd like Jensen to answer is when will performance, year over year performance gains start to slow, or will we not see the same kind of like reason to upgrade? Because right now it feels like everybody's upgrading. In fact, I saw a sell side note a couple days ago that outlined the actual cost ROI from Hopper to Blackwell has gone down 50%. So they justify, you move to Blackwell, you're actually getting significant cost gains in performance, in dollar amount you'd spend for the same workloads. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? I think a 50% decrease is great. But at some point in time, it's going to be like 5% or 10. I don't know. Wherever you draw the line of,
Yeah.
I'm fine with last year's model. I don't need to upgrade, right? At some point in time, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
We just have no idea when. And at that time, that's where this problem emerges for NVIDIA if the demand for GPUs drastically slows.
Yeah. I mean, you look at Blackwell versus Hopper, it's double the size basically, right? And so, and it's not double the price. And so
Right.
they're losing some margin. The performance they're talking about, it's the same manufacturing process, right? So there's not huge performance gains. There's just, you get more done because you have more silicon footprint, less power, however the math works out. It's not a huge differentiation this generation to the next. But I think to your point, like when does that happen? Well, the next one that comes out, R100, whenever that comes out next year, I guess. I think that'll be on what, 3 nanometer, 2 nanometer. So we will get big performance gains. So I think they can keep it going a while longer.
Yeah, I think so too. We just don't know
How
long.
But there is this weird thing where, like, Jensen loves to say that Moore's law is dying, but that still affects him as much as anyone else. And so there is that weird dynamic of squeezing out more performance gains here that doesn't seem to be materializing.
Yeah. Okay. Any regulatory / geopolitical concerns? I mean, I would say I saw a lot of people, I don't know if you saw this, a lot of people start bringing up NVIDIA when the DOJ launched their antitrust suit against Apple, being like, well, if Apple can have a monopoly in the premium smartphone market, which is a small fraction of the smartphone market, well, and NVIDIA has 99% of data centers, like, they should be worried. I'm not sure they really need to be worried, but I also think it's a interesting conversation to have. But regulatory, I mean, are there real regulatory concerns for NVIDIA?
So of course, the better they do, the more they risk that.
Yeah,
I think that they're very cognizant of that risk.
I
And so
agree.
they're taking a lot of steps early on to
Agreed.
minimize the threat surface. So I think that's why Jensen talks so much about, oh, if you want the bundle, you buy the bundle. If you want just the part, you just buy the part.
Get the part.
Right?
Absolutely.
So there's no bundle. And of course they never use the word bundle because that's bad antitrust language. So they never say bundle. If you want the whole system, buy the whole system. Right? So but at the same time, we all know that, like, behind the scenes, they really would prefer if you bought the whole system.
Of
And
course.
you can buy what you want, but it's better if you buy the whole system. Right? And so, they're aware of it. They're aware of it. I know, also talking to some of the people who are listening to their language very carefully, some of the reporters I've talked to, it's very clear, like, somebody the lawyers went through and told everyone how to talk about this stuff and be careful not to use these words. They're tiptoeing around it. I don't think there's any immediate threat of that. It's not clear who the plaintiff would be, who's really harmed by
Yep.
this, who's
Agreed.
complaining at this point.
Agreed. And
But
on and
that's I think it's
on this point, I feel like they have towed this line for a long time. I feel like they've been cognizant about this for a long time. And there are, I'm not going to name names, but there are at least two times in their history where they got burned by a competitor who was a monopoly. And they saw it first front and center how that game was played. They were complaining to people, like lobbying, like, hey, I'm being locked out of this market because this competitor is a better bundler and I don't have that part of the pie, so I'm getting priced out. And they've seen it. And so I think they've been very, very careful about this for a long time, which is one of the reasons why they don't monetize CUDA and some of these other things, right? They make it very like, oh, we should give it away. AMD can have it if they want it. Intel can take it. Do what you want. But it doesn't run as good, but it's still free. They can. So I think they have been very, very strategic about this for much longer than anybody knows on the surface, which is why I agree with you. I don't think they're of any risk in the short term.
yeah, yeah. It's out there. It'll come, but it's a very long
Yeah.
way away.
And is there anything going to change in China that opens up that market to either Nvidia or AMD or Intel or any other players in a broader way, or should we just kind of write off the China opportunity for many of the companies we mentioned?
I think I think NVIDIA becomes a test case for how serious the US government is about maintaining or extending these restrictions. Because you have this incredibly successful American company that is bumping up against the limit of export restrictions, is losing revenue, pretty meaningful revenue in China. And we do see, like we talked about hyperscalers doing their own silicon before. I didn't mention, I think Alibaba is probably the most advanced. Like
Yeah.
Alibaba's silicon is not great, but I think they're very, very serious about building their own AI accelerators because they recognize they're not going to get what they need from NVIDIA.
Yeah.
And that's like exactly what everyone who's sort of anti-US sanctions is saying is like, this is just going to make China stronger. And I think there is that risk. And so how the US government proceeds with that it will be telling because it's a good test case for the limits of sanctions.
Yeah. Agreed. I'm intrigued because, well, one, I don't think them not having full China access really hurts this story, right? There's no bull case around it. Should things change and all of a sudden, I don't even know if China would want to do this. They may want to just stay custom and local. But should things turn around and China hyperscalers go, ooh, we need Nvidia, and that's actually a pretty big upside, right, to their story. So curious how that plays out. But as of now, it's not a pro or a con, right?
Yeah.
It's just a market they don't have the same access to as others. So
Yeah. Yeah.
all right, good look at Nvidia. Everybody send us your thoughts if you agree with us in areas. If we missed anything, we always appreciate your comments. Thanks for listening to this another episode of The Circuit, and we will talk to you next time.
Thank you, everybody. Tell your friends, click like and share, all the rest. Bye.